Doris.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi.
how are you?
Well, do you want me to read it out?
Doris, can I just compliment you on your question? Of all the questions we heard, I felt yours was the most sincere, to be honest.
Thank you.
The main reason why is because you're considering your sin. And this is something that's very unique amongst people generally. You know, most people are thinking, how can I benefit my own life? And they ask questions about benefiting their own life all the time. But they're not considering that actually a lot of the penalties on the soul that cause your life to not be very well managed on earth are due to your sin. And so a lot of times people think, I want to benefit my life, I want to progress, I want to, basically I want to avoid my pain, my future pain, by making good decisions. But it's all me, like there's no feeling for what they've done in the past towards other people. And yet, from God's perspective and also from the law's perspective, the law of compensation I'm talking about now, that law is actually causing degradation to your soul as you engage new sins. And so the more selfish a person becomes, that's actually a sin. And so, it turns out that a lot of times we're so focused on self, improving self, we forget that actually most of the penalties that have occurred on our soul with regard to love are how we're treating other people. And your question was one of the very few questions that we've got so far in the entire trip, actually, so far, that was focused on what can I do to undo my sins against other people. So I must compliment you on that.
I'll read it out, hey, and then if you want to add. If we want to repair the damage we have done, do we have to help that specific group of people that we've damaged or any group of people?
Yeah. Have you got anything specifically in mind?
The question came up with this chocolate and coffee thing.
Yes.
So if we obviously damaged many people through our consumptions.
And the environment as well.
And the environment.
Yes, we have. Yeah.
And if we want to undo some of that damage, do we then have to help that specific people in that country or to help that environment in that country?
Yeah.
Or is it if we help poor people in our country that it also is some kind of undoing the damage?
Yes, a very good question. In the spirit, if you were living in the spirit world, of course, accessibility to the people you've damaged is much more readily available because you can go straight to their place and start helping them straight away. On earth, that's not always possible, obviously, because you might be prevented from going into the country or there might be restrictions placed on your movements and other things like that which prevent you from taking direct action sometimes. Not always, though, and it's quite rare on earth that you're prevented from taking direct action. But in the spirit world, generally, when you recognise there's been sins that you've engaged that have harmed others, generally you want to help the persons that you've harmed. Right? So that's a very common thing. And what that means too is that you've understood not only the law of compensation in the fact that there's a penalty on your own soul for harming those persons, but also that you want to repair the damage. We call it reparation. You want to make reparation to the people you've harmed. So that's as soon as you are sincerely connected to your sin, you'll find you'll have two feelings. One will be, I know I'm guilty of the sin, and the other one will be, I want to do something about that to fix that. Firstly, I want to fix that in myself so I don't do that sin again. But also I want to make reparation to the people I've harmed in my sin. And quite often those two actions are concurrent. They happen at the same time. Where on one hand you're trying to undo the damage within yourself as to why you took the actions you took, finding the cause as to why you decided to do that thing. So in the case of chocolate, coffee, and these kind of seemingly innocent addictions, you would have a look at, well, why do you need those substances? And also the whole attitude we have of getting them as cheaply as possible. It often works out that a cup of coffee in some places is cheaper than the water you buy in the same place, and things like that. So how come it's so cheap? It's cheaper than the water you're buying. So what's going on there? It means obviously it's because we need them that cheap to have them every day and to have so much of it. So, you know, what financial problems or what financial attitudes do you have towards these things as well is a part of that feeling of compensation. And then, on the other hand, we now are going, oh, now I'm recognising the damage I've done to those people. You know, they are living in poverty for the most part, in countries that are quite pretty and beautiful in the sense that they're all usually mid-equatorial countries, you know, where they're around the equator, they have quite large rainfalls, a tropical environment. But many of those countries are very, very poor and have been, basically the resources of those countries have been raped by Western countries for many, many centuries now. You know, that started once, you know, the Spanish and the English and the Dutch, and they all built ships in the 16th, 15th, 16th century, and then they all went conquering the world. And they found all of these different countries that were full of resources, and that conquering of the world has now continued right the way through to our present day. And in fact, many of these countries speak the language of the country that conquered them, and many of the countries also are still owned or in a part owned, and many of their resources owned by the countries that conquered them. So there's a lot of continual damage that's happened over the last, 600 years probably, that has occurred, and we have all, without often knowing it at the beginning, we've all become complicit in the continuing damage of those particular countries. So what do I do about that? I've got the damage of the people in those countries that I've been a part of, and then I've also got the damage of the environment in those countries that I've also been a part of, which also means all the damage to the environment that includes the degradation of species, the endangerment of species as well as the extinction of species. And so you can see that some of the things can't actually be fixed now. So an example of that is there's mass extinction of species through the mid-equatorial region of the Earth that has been going on now for over a century and a half. And that's resulted in the endangerment and also extinction of species in those areas, because whole swathes of tropical rainforest has been cleared for the sake of coffee and tea and for the sake of cocoa and other products. And so it's also palm oil also is happening all the way through Indonesia. So you get they rip out all of these rainforests, and of course that means all of the species that are dependent upon those forests now have nowhere to live, and they die off within a generation. Generally, they've got nowhere to nest or breed. They've got no way. Food sources have now dried up. They've got no method of reproducing, and unless they adapt within a year or two, they are gone. Now, some of the animals have adapted within a year or two, but most of them don't. Most of them just don't adapt at all, and they end up disappearing completely. If they're larger animals, they end up in captivity, generally, like orangutans or something like that would end up in captivity. When they're smaller animals, generally they get killed off and don't come back. And that results in the extinction of species. So I'm thinking my innocent little, cuppa a day or whatever, but now that I'm realising, there's a bigger problem here, and there's also the problem to the environment, but the bigger problem is the problem to the humans, because they are living in poverty. They often have higher levels of disease, higher mortality rates for their children. Many children, there's 50 million children dying but before they're 5 years of age in the world at the moment. So that's a lot, isn't it? 50 million children dying before 5 years of age. And a lot of that is as a result of the destruction of their environment, but also the destruction of their way of living and earning enough money to support family, particularly for many of them large families, because many of them don't have, contraception. Is it? Contraception. Yeah, it's a long time since I've used that word. And so naturally they have large families, and therefore it's even more difficult for them to care for their families. So you quite often find families, whole families of 20 people living on $1 to $4 US a day, a week, sometimes even, in those countries. And so they're very, very poor. They don't have shoes. They don't have much clothes. Fortunately, they don't need a lot of clothes because of the tropical environment. If they were living here, they'd freeze to death basically. But because they're living there, that doesn't happen. But obviously, they'd have no future. They have no way of... Education is scarce because everybody in the family needs to work from a young age. So if you're looking at all of that damage, obviously your heart will, if you're soft, if you're sensitive, your heart will go, wow, that's a lot of damage, What can I do about that? Well, if you think about it, there's a number of things that can be done, isn't there? Firstly, how brave are you? It's going to get down to, isn't it? How brave you are about fixing these things, particularly on Earth, because there's momentum towards extorting and abusing people who are poor. And actually nowadays you're going to find in the future that even middle class start to be poor. Because of what's happening. It's happening in your environment here a lot, where you've got to pay for every single thing. And they're also reducing the sizes of everything, while at the same time keeping the prices the same. So it means you get less and less for paying the same amount. And so it ends up that more and more people get poor using these economic methods. So the problem is that these countries are very poor, and the people in the countries are very poor, but also the whole world is sort of moving towards more and more poverty, the way we're managing the economy. And it's only those people who do things like investing in what I'd call schemes that are not producing any resources, but like digital currency, for things like that. They don't produce anything. But people benefit from people getting on the bandwagon, and the price seemingly goes up and all those kind of things. But it's all very unethical because at the end of the day, there's no real benefit to society through production by those things. So there's a lot of unethical practices in economy, and a lot of people have tried to convince me that digital currency is the answer, and I'm going, but it's just as bad as the currency we've got, really, in terms of ethics, So the problem is that all of these problems are ending up with more and more poverty. So what do? We're many of us middle class here, right? What we'd classify as middle class, or at least we're not in poverty, in complete poverty. And so what can we do to help these systems change? And how brave are we to start these changes occurring on Earth? That's the real question. So the first thing I would look at is this. Firstly, you're going to need the quality of some courage, aren't you? On Earth, to decide to do something. But if your heart is affected by what you've done in the past and you are sincere, you will develop this courage to get something done. The second thing that needs to happen on Earth is education. So one of the biggest places where you can help is to educate people of what's going on. So in your own environment, so let's say we're here in, say, Austria or Germany or one of these countries where we're doing these things, Belgium with the chocolate and all these kind of things, and we can start educating the environment. Look, this is what's going on for the sake of this particular thing. And we need to be brave enough to put it out there. There's lots of different ways now where you can share information, isn't there? Social media and other things, and also face to face is the really key one. So you could actually start some seminars and with pictures of this is what's happening because of this problem, and invite people along for free. You could run them at nights and weekends or whatever, and eventually people will donate to you. You could start a non-profit where people can donate to, so you can funnel funds to the people in those countries that are being exploited. But also, you could also go to the countries and see what they need, rather than sort of thinking, well, I know what they need. You could go there and actually have a few weeks there or a month there and experience life with them. What is it they need? What do they want? What is going to improve it for them? And then you'll start seeing that systems are a problem. Economic systems and production systems of the earth are a problem. So then we've got to start going through the process of talking about how unloving those systems are. So now the education process is now expanding to saying how unloving are the companies and governments that are running these systems, and but not only just how unloving they are, but think about and work through ways in which you can help them become more loving. Does that make sense? So there's no point just criticising something without offering a solution, right? So you want to be able to offer solutions. People are looking for solutions. So you would be involved in the process of trying to help people have solutions to these problems. So what's the solution to people who are growing cocoa plants? Obviously they're destroying forests and everything. Isn't it better that maybe they have some other production that doesn't do so much degradation to the rainforest in those locations and to the environment? The problem with cocoa trees is what they do generally, even in the national parks and everything. They clear, without the government's approval, of course, but they just, because they need the money, they clear parts of the national park and then they plant a whole heap of cocoa trees in the national park. And then, of course, the problem with a lot of subtropical and tropical rainforests is they've got very little topsoil. There are systems that rely on the cover to maintain the quality of the soil and the constant dropping of leaves and everything to improve the quality of the soil. And when you take all of that away, the quality of the soil also degrades very rapidly after that, and sometimes within a generation, that's all gone as well through erosion and other problems. So you have to understand the problems, and that's a part of your own education as well as, once you have your own education, you'll see the problems clearly, and then you'll be able to go, what do I do about that? How can I help that? And you can see, once you start this educational process of yourself and you're sincere and you love, you're focused on love. How can I bring more love into it? How can it become a more loving thing? So if people want to eat chocolate, well, that's one thing. There's all these plants and chocolate, cocoa plants are one of them. There's sugar cane, which adds to the sugar in the chocolate as well. And then there's other parts, obviously fats and everything that are a part of it as well. But they get added and it gets all refined and there's all processes. But how can I make them all more loving so that they make a lot more sense? Then there's also the process of educating the people who consume as to why they're consuming so much of it, isn't there? And that's, as you saw yesterday, a lot more difficult because it's the consumption that drives the damage, right? So you can't just go, let's go and change it for them in, say, Equatorial Guinea or Ghana or wherever they're growing the cocoa. You've got to go, okay, I've got to change the pattern of the people who are consuming this product. Now that you'll find is a lot more difficult because that's now about confronting people's addictions. And people don't like their addictions confronted at all. They're always in a fight with that. But you need to, again, have courage to confront addictions. Your own, obviously, as well as others. Now, if you look at all of that, you can see that if I confront the addictions in people, then people won't consume as much. That will then mean that companies are no longer making a profit. That will then mean that they won't put so much pressure on people like developing the product, right? And that then puts less pressure on the environment. So you can see that this is the more important, really, thing to do. And unfortunately, that's the thing nobody wants you to do, right? This is what Mary and I focus on in our travels. And it's also the area where almost everyone who listens to us doesn't like us. Yeah?
Yeah. Can I say I used to be involved in the top 3?
Mary used to do these things.
And when I met Jesus, I was like, what are you doing talking to all these middle-class people? You know, there's people suffering.
Yeah. And Mary and I
now,
used to have disagreement about where should we focus our attention.
Yeah.
Should we go to the poor people who are being damaged and help them, or do we focus on the cause of the damage?
And I actually now feel passionately that the responsibility to make these shifts really lies in Western society. And it's to deal with, it's not just about the environment. You know, within each of us, there's feelings of entitlement, of demand, a feeling that we are more entitled than other people, just through the multi-generational heritage that we have.
The conquering heritage.
Yep.
Yep.
It's in all of us. And it comes out in many ways in the way that we live our life. And I feel that dealing with those emotions for yourself is going to be pivotal to making reparation. I don't now understand how I can do that without doing that first myself. Also, the feeling of exploiting. If something is easy, then I will exploit that. If someone has an injury or a neediness, I will exploit that. A lot of us have that in us. It's difficult to admit, you know.
We see that a lot because we provide free seminars and free everything, and people forget that it costs us money to do that. And so they just take it for free, take it for free, take it free. There's people who have even said to us, like, with a lot of pride, that the entire 15 years that they've been listening to Divine Truth, they've never donated a cent to our effort. And because they have that attitude, take for free, it's given for free, so take it for free, take it for free, take it for free, keep taking it for free. Yeah. And this is a problem. You know, many of us have this thing of keep consuming. The cheaper it is, the more we consume.
And the feeling that we're entitled to avoid our emotional pain drives a lot of these things. Like really, when we talk about coffee and chocolate and all of those things we're using to comfort emotion, and unless we deal with that desire within ourselves, it's difficult to understand how we will be leaders in education and leaders in change, because how will we think of the systems, you know? I'm not saying do nothing. I'm not disputing what Jesus is saying. I think if you do, but you must be committed to that spiritual work for it to be effective. And I think we've got to be careful of being, fix me is really the biggest, because
so these are sort of, you know, you can say courage is going to be required, but fix me first, then confront the addictions in others, then try to solve the issues of education and other things in the companies and everything that exploit these people, then try to help the people.
Yeah. And I think in the process of fixing you, you will be led to action. Your heart will pull you towards action. And I think you'll also see the ways that you've exploited people in your own society and the way your greed has caused you to consume more than you need and all of those things. But I do feel that it's a spiritual solution, and I think we're the people to do that. Yeah.
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 Yeah.